I'm not even recording. So this is today's agenda. I want to talk about some very unexciting topics like citations, the rhetorical précis, deductive and inductive reasoning. If we have time, I'll introduce the prompt for the next essay, which is on Canvas, and I'll introduce the next reading, which is related to the next prompt, since you'll be responding to some aspect of that next reading. So citations, definitely not the most interesting thing we have ever talked about, and yet they are important. Why? Because when you use MLA formatting, you are demonstrating that you are part of a community, a writing community that uses those things. Increasingly, I will be asking you to include your citations when you do a reading journal, when you do an analysis. Those will need to be there and they will be part of your grade. Some professors here at SDSU aren't big on making sure that your citations are perfect, but some of them definitely are. And so it's important for you to be aware of these things. This is a citation for an academic journal that has print copies and also is found online. And every one of these things, last name, comma, first name, period, title of text and quotation marks, the title of the journal, the volume number, the edition number, the page range, and the URL need to be there. And then the date that you accessed it, access, day, month, year. And I wanted to, I'm going to have to do a new share so you can see this. This is Teresa Tony's text. And so some of the information is readily, are you looking at her text right now, or do you still see the PowerPoint?
We see the text. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you so much. So you can see the page range definitely. So 347 all the way down to 362. So this is useful information. You can find that easily if the pages are numbered. Sometimes you have to request a PDF copy in order to get that, but it's important for you to do that. Let me do a new share, go back to the PowerPoint, and you didn't see the volume number or the edition number on there, but you can assume those exist. And sometimes you have to do an extra step to find it. And so if you Google this, you will be able to access it. And so here is, do you see that now? Where I Googled and I have the text, the ResearchGate page. Do you see that?
We see it.
Okay, thank you. You can see that the volume number is 38 and the edition is 4. And so now you have all the information, and that's how you have to approach this. You have to go the extra mile in order to access that information. And so this is what that would look like. Volume number 38, edition number 4, May 2011, the page range, the URL. Notice that I've removed the link from the URL in order to break it up, and the accessed date. I tend to do citations as I access the texts. I create them immediately, and then I can organize them later on if I'm ever going to use that source again, but I always have them in my notes. And it revolutionized my academic writing to be able to do that immediately. It also gives me a lot more confidence. When I was in my undergrad, I was terrified of citations. Any questions about citations? Okay, let's talk about the précis and analyzing rhetorical strategies. First of all, everyone's receiving full credit. I have not read all of these. I had 60 of them, and now I have 29, so I've read a good number, and everybody did a really good job following the précis template. So thank you very much for adhering to that very strange sentence structure and doing your best with it. I will give you feedback on things that you did well and things that you can do better. When you identify the argument, when you can identify the argument explicitly in the text, and you know you can't communicate that argument with a quotation, you have to think, how can I paraphrase that argument? In the case of Teresa Toney, you don't have to figure out her argument because she communicates it explicitly in the second sentence of her paper. You know exactly what her argument is. And that means that you have to think about a way to say what she says her argument is in your own words, reorganizing the sentence structure, thinking about what it is that she's communicating. In some cases, in many cases of the précis I read, the argument wasn't communicated as well as I would like because it did not reflect her argument statement. It reflected some other claim or some other understanding of the text. Academic writing, in some ways, is easier to read than personal essays because it's so explicit. And so it's important for you to pay attention to where the author is being so direct. Some of the précis I read didn't consider who the primary audience for this academic journal is. She was writing about how to communicate to first-year students, but she wasn't writing to first-year students. She is writing to teachers of first-year students. You also have to think, how does she want her audience to respond? Well, she makes it very clear. She wants them to start teaching these conventions of academic discourse to the first-year students. That's her purpose, to challenge them, to give them strategies for doing that. Everybody identified a rhetorical strategy, sometimes big names, sometimes compare and contrast. But the analysis didn't always reflect the purpose of a rhetorical strategy, which is to make the argument stronger. And so no matter what argument you choose, you need to think about how does that strategy, and specifically the example I'm providing, how is that making Tony's argument more persuasive for her primary audience? And that's the analysis that you need to do. And you have to think about, how are they responding? What is making this seem more logical? What is increasing her trustworthiness. And in many cases, it'll be both of those things. And this is a lot more complex than just informing her audience. And this is a lot more complex than showing she's knowledgeable. And this is a lot more complex than just demonstrating that she's done the research. Because remember, she's writing to a primary audience where everybody is using big names and authorities, and everybody is providing lots of evidence. So there has to be more than that. I want to show you a rhetorical précis that was written by a student. And I liked her rhetorical précis, and so I wanted to share it. I've color-coded the different sentences. That's why they're all different colors. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but it does make ideas stand out. So in her article titled Teaching the Conventions of Academic Discourse, published in Teaching English in the Two-Year College, English professor Teresa Toney discusses the shared characteristics of academic writing and argues that by teaching them to first-year students, the students will be prepared to excel and succeed through their later university years. Good paraphrase that reflects that second sentence. She supports this claim by listing the most common characteristics of academic writing, providing strong, well-educated examples of where the characteristics are present in other scholars' work, and warranting how the characteristics, as seen through examples, will aid in first-year students' success in the future of their academic career. Now, there are a couple of things I didn't like as much. I didn't understand the verb warranting, but I was okay with that. It's not always wise to provide subjective adjectives such as strong, well-educated. I think examples would have been just fine, but I liked this sentence. The third sentence, it's always what's one thing she's doing and how does she want her audience to respond. Toney's purpose is to inform her audience of educators about common similarities found within academic writing in order to persuade them to teach their students this concept with the hope of it strengthening their ability to succeed throughout the rest of their education. There's a lot of there, and those refer to different antecedents, so that's a little hard to follow, but I understood what the author meant super well, and I liked what this author was doing. This last sentence, I very much appreciated what the author's doing, and I think that it feeds into the idea of underlying assumptions and clarifies why the author is using certain strategies. Toney adopts an unbiased and professional tone in order to persuade her audience of educators or first-year college students who strive to best prepare their pupils for the challenges of college writing. What is their goal? This author names it, and it makes all of the rest of the précis make more sense. Toney is doing things in the text in order to persuade her audience, this audience that already cares about preparing students for success. Any questions about this rhetorical précis in light of what you wrote or clarification of what the précis does? Okay, let's take a look at the rhetorical strategy. And I'll go ahead and read it. Yes, I should have good grammar, but I don't always. Teresa Tony uses the rhetorical strategy of example. The author could have used exemplification, which is the fancy way of saying using examples, most prominently throughout teaching the conventions of academic discourse. Through using a multitude of varying academic journals that stem from several different genres and topics, Tony is able to develop herself as a credible resource on the topic of education. For each common characteristic she lists, Tony provides 3 quotations, each a different academic journal of where the characteristic is prominent. This can be seen, for example, when she considers the characteristic of an academic writer's ability to accept a reader's right to disagree. She leads into how they will use hedges by offering quotes from a sports medicine journal and a psychology journal, leading with the statement that in each quote, examples of hedges are italicized in the following sentences. And one of the things I thought this author did very nicely is explaining the use of the examples. This isn't evidence, this isn't the use of big names and authorities, because Tony's not referencing these examples to highlight the authors of those texts. These are not big names and authorities, because what she's more interested in is not who they are, who wrote it, relying on their authority, but the way they are using these conventions in order to illustrate her claims that these are conventions. And I thought the author set that up very nicely. The author continues by analyzing the effect of this use of exemplification. By providing these strong examples, Tony not only establishes her argument well by providing a vast array of evidence, but she also establishes herself as a credible source. She appeals to ethos by backing up every claim she makes with highly credible sources and deems herself as trustworthy, allowing her audience of educators to be more open to listen to her argument. By providing highly educated examples from varying subjects of academic journals, she develops herself as an extremely reliable and credible source on the subject. This allows her to be more persuasive. Now, it definitely, by providing a vast array of examples, it definitely makes her seem more credible, but it's not necessarily because she has so much evidence. It's because these were randomly chosen, and it makes her examples seem like they're not biased. So that's another thing this author could have said. The other thing I want to highlight is it's not just about trustworthiness. It's not just about ethos, it's about logos. And I want to introduce a concept related to logos. Remember, logos isn't just the use of evidence, it's using logic or reasoning to make the argument seem true. There's 2 types of reasoning that you're probably familiar with. One is deductive reasoning, and the other is inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning goes from general to specific. It uses a major premise and a minor premise that lead to a conclusion. So the major premise is an all-inclusive premise. For example, and this is a commonly used example, all humans are mortal. It is true. Socrates is human. That's the minor premise. So it goes from general to specific. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Indeed, he did die, and therefore it's true. The only thing is this only works if both premises are true. I give you another example. That's my dog Cheddar. He passed away about 1.5 years ago, but this is him when he was a puppy in happier days when he had lots of energy. And yeah, anyways, all dogs love to chew on bones. Major premise, general to specific. Cheddar is a dog. Minor premise. Therefore, Cheddar must love to chew on bones. And remember that thing that I said, this only works if both premises are true? I'm guessing that not all of you, or I'm guessing that some of you have dogs that are not interested in chewing on bones. And therefore, we can't necessarily conclude that Cheddar loves to chew on bones. The thing is most dogs love to chew on bones. And so we can say it is likely that Cheddar will love to chew on bones. That brings me to inductive reasoning. So if we experience something over and over and over again, we assume that something is a pattern, it's common, and that's inductive reasoning. It's a common method for arguing, especially when the conclusion seems to be an obvious probability. And this is not a bad form of reasoning, it's just problematic. So I have this example of inductive reasoning, 10, 20, 30, 40, and immediately your mind goes to 50. So that's really useful, this inductive reasoning. Example, 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 conclusion. Of course, it could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 80. And then we'd have to look at more examples in order to follow the pattern. Let me give you an example of inductive reasoning to show that a small number of examples doesn't necessarily lead to a truth. Cheddar will balance food on his head. And yes, he would. It was amazing. So we could put a Ritz cracker on the top of his head. And he didn't really get Ritz crackers very often. I do understand it's not good to give dog Ritz crackers, but this was another age in my life. Cheddar would balance that food on his head because he knew if he just waited, we would tell him, okay, and then he could go eat it. And so, yeah, so there we go. Cheddar will balance food on his head. Cheddar is a dog, therefore, we can't say all dogs will balance food on their heads. I have 2 different dogs now, and neither one of them will balance food on their heads. That is just too much for them. And they want to eat whatever's on their head. And so we have given up on training this. This is inductive reasoning specific to general. Let's go back to that rhetorical strategy. This use of examples. What kind of reasoning is this?
Is it generalizing something? Like taking smaller examples and getting like one big statement from it?
Yes, this is inductive reasoning. So example, example, example from multiple sources, randomly chosen, all lead to the, like very specific examples, specific to general. Therefore, all academic writing will do this. And that's how she's done her research. And that's what this illustrates, even more than ethos, is logos. Inductive reasoning, we see example, 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 and we conclude, therefore, this must be common for all academic writing. And it mostly is. You may, in your research, find that authors are increasingly using second person, that they use a lot of, some disciplines might use a lot of narrative, some disciplines might not. Nevertheless, this is useful research that Teresa Tony does. And this rhetorical strategy analysis would have been stronger if it had considered the way this exemplification functions to appeal to logos. Any questions about inductive and deductive reasoning? Oh, I miss cheddar. But if I didn't have cheddar, if I still had cheddar, I wouldn't have Milo. And so it's this really mixed bag. Okay, so why am I focusing on this type of analysis? It's because your last essay of the semester is going to ask you to analyze how evidence, rhetorical strategies, and rhetorical appeals work to persuade primary audiences. You're going to be making claims about how to persuade diverse audiences using a variety of genres. So how do you appeal to audience and purpose? Like, how do you use rhetorical strategies if you're working with an academic audience? How do you use rhetorical strategies and evidence if you're appealing to a more popular audience? What about underlying assumptions? All of those things. You're going to be using new analyses or revised versions of the analyses you're writing right now in order to illustrate your claims. You're going to be analyzing how not just how they use strategies and evidence and underlying assumptions in their writing, but how you have been using evidence, strategies, appeals in your papers, considering your primary audiences and the genre that you're using. You'll also be integrating the various sources we've read about writing in order to develop your ideas. So you might be citing E. Shelley Reid, you might be citing some of the sources on writing personal essays, and you will have more of those types of texts as we move forward. I explain this because you're wondering, why are we doing this? You keep giving us the full number of points, no matter how we do. It's because I expect you to revise. By the way, it's not a bad idea to think about that revision or getting feedback from the Writing Center, even as you go about writing these things. You do need to go to the Writing Center twice. Oh, actually, you don't need to, but you have the opportunity to earn up to 10 points of extra credit from going to the Writing Center in the month of October. So, and I've said enough about that. So assignments this week. You are not doing an identity wheel activity because you've already done that. You're going to be reading Nancy Barron and Nancy Grimm's research article, Addressing Diversity in the Writing Center, Stories from Two Beginners, and you're going to write a reading journal. You're going to join the discussion board discussion related to that reading. Initial post on Thursday, other students on Saturday. You're also going to read an article titled Finding the Good Argument, or Why Bother with Logic? And you're going to write a reading journal. This is published in the same book as E. Shelley Reid's article that we started the semester with. And so you are her primary audience. This is for Rebecca Jones. For Barron and Grimm, no, you are not the primary audience. And of course, this is a reflection direction journal. Let me introduce the text that Barron and Grimm write. They start with an epigraph, a quotation. Narrative provides a way to speak things otherwise unspeakable, to give voice to that which would otherwise go unheard. What would you anticipate? You're reading an academic journal that begins with this epigraph. An epigraph is a quote that sets a tone for the writing that follows. What would you anticipate based on this epigraph? Hannah, what would you anticipate?
I was thinking that because it says narrative, it's probably going to be personal.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some personal things in this journal article. What are some other things that you might anticipate from this? Carlos?
Yeah.
What other things might you anticipate with an article that starts with an epigraph like this?
Probably some more personal background information.
Some personal background information, definitely. Anything else that you would expect that this article might include? Anyone?
I think that will probably include examples and counterexamples to the argument that's introduced here. They say that just by including that things are unspeakable, at least there's some group of that, and they want to prove that if you're able to write it, then you're able to give it meaning in which you couldn't normally say it.
Yes, and I would go even more specifically, Derek. I would say that it's going to include those narratives that give voice to things that wouldn't have been spoken. The narratives will give voice to things that might otherwise go unheard. And I think that that's important. One of the things that you will note as you read writing-centered literature, and when I say literature, that's what research is called in academic writing. It's called the literature, not fiction, just research. One thing you'll notice in writing-centered literature is there are often narratives. They don't open with a narrative, however. They open by introducing themselves. And so Hannah and Carlos were very correct. There would be some personal background information. We know, or I've introduced the idea that writing and identity go hand in hand, and they want to share their identities in order to create a frame or context for how they understand the narratives that will follow. And so this is how they begin. The academic essay, even the collaborative academic essay, is generally written in a single voice. Although we share the same first name and the same theoretical commitments, we do not share similar histories and perspectives. One of us is Mexican American, or Chicana, or Latina. A new assistant professor with many years of experience being a student of color in Anglo institutions, that's Nancy Barron. And one of us is white, or Anglo or Caucasian. of Irish Lithuanian heritage, a longtime Writing Center director from a working class background, Nancy Grimm. Although our shared commitments as literacy educators allow us to sometimes use we to signal our unity and purpose, we also employ our individual I's to mark our different racial, generational, and cultural perspectives. The work we discuss in this article would not have been possible if we shared the same voice and history. In foregrounding our differences, as well as our mutual vision, we create a sometimes bumpy ride for the reader, interfering with our modernist expectations of coherence, yet exposing the seams we think our readers need to see in order to understand how the fabrics of our personal and professional lives connected. We move as well between narrative and exposition, between practice and theory, in order to give voice to that which would otherwise go unheard. So there will be lots of narratives and discussion about those narratives and how those narratives impact them because of their personal identities and experiences, racial, generational, and cultural perspectives. I think that it's important to add that our class is also diverse. We have generational, so I'm the only one who's generational, has a generational diversity difference, but cultural and ethnic perspectives were represented in many, many ways in this class. And that means that we're all going to see things a little differently. And just as they note that their conclusions wouldn't have been possible without hearing diverse voices, I want to emphasize the same thing. It's as we hear diverse perspectives that we get a better picture of how writing centers and tutoring and literacy education in general can make a difference and empower students to raise their voices. I want to bring us to the parable of the blind man and the elephant, which comes from ancient India. Actually, I did not know that. This is a picture that was created. It's a piece of artwork that was created many, many centuries ago. And if you're not familiar with the parable of the blind man and the elephant, it's these blind men have heard about elephants, but they don't know, they've never seen an elephant. And so they have the opportunity to encounter an elephant. And so they each do as blind people might do, because their fingers are their eyes. And so they explore the elephant. One looks at the tail and says, this is what an elephant is like. It's like, I forget what the analogy is. Another one looks at the side of an elephant. Another touches the ears. Another touches the trunk. Another touches the legs. And so they, with their varying perspectives, they learn that an elephant is like a snake, like a tree, like a wall. And of course, you've seen an elephant and you know an elephant isn't like any of those things, that the true picture of an elephant is piecing together all of that information, and all of those perspectives lead to deeper understanding. And that's what we are doing in this next essay. We are going to look at what Barron and Grimm explore. This paper was written in 2002. And keep in mind that academic writers are always responding to what others have written. And so we have to know where the conversations start. We have to know what others have written in order to join that conversation. And so I'm starting with an article that's 20 years old, but which is still ongoing today. I learned that Catherine, our Writing Center director, actually studied, Nancy Grimm was her mentor, and she worked alongside Nancy Barron. And so she was part of these conversations, not when they wrote this, but just a few years later. And so she has unique perspectives. And now that I know this, I've started asking her all kinds of questions about what they were doing and what they were learning, because they are joining alongside of us. So questions for me. We don't have time to talk about the prompt, so I would encourage you to read it. We'll touch on it on Wednesday, and we'll begin discussing Barron and Grimm's article. So questions for me before we wrap up?
I just wanted to clarify, I probably should have mentioned it earlier while you were on the topic, but the rhetorical précis, it's not one continuous sentence, but rather 4 sentences.
That is correct.
Okay. I think I might have misinterpreted the structure of that template because I tried to squeeze it all into one sentence.
Wow.
And it was a one run on sentence, but it did have all the information I felt, but it would have been probably a little bit better to expand into 4 sentences.
So aren't you happy that you're getting full credit no matter what?
Yeah, for sure.
Like I said, you have time to revise these. By the way, those précis will also be in that final essay because you'll have to introduce the text in order to do the analysis. So yay. It's not the most exciting essay, but it will be a useful essay as you move forward and as you start thinking about how do you write persuasively in other classes. So that's all I've got. It's 11:51. You are free to leave, go to your next class, run away from your home, as long as you socially distance and so forth. So I'll stick around and answer a few more questions if you need to. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Have a good
Bye,
day.
David. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connor.